Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some records refuse to be erased. Tonight we unseal a file that was ordered destroyed over half a century ago. A document that details an event so disturbing, the official record insists it never happened. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some documents are not meant to be found. Deep beneath Theodine plains of North America, shielded by tons of reinforced concrete and earth, lies a place that officially does not exist. It is not a bunker, not a command center. It is a library of secrets, a tomb of forgotten truths. They call it Archive 734. Its climate-controlled corridors stretch for miles, a labyrinth of steel shelves groaning under the weight of history's darkest chapters. Here, every file represents a decision, a compromise, a life, or a lie that was deemed too dangerous for public memory. The air itself is heavy, tasting of aged paper, ozone from the humming servers, and the cold, sterile scent of absolute secrecy. This is the realm of the archivist, the silent guardian of forbidden knowledge. And on a day like any other, one such guardian, Aerys Thorne, would discover an impossibility. A file that, by every law of physics and bureaucracy, should not have been there. Aerys was a man of meticulous order. For 30 years, his life had been a symphony of catalog numbers, declassification schedules, and the quiet rustle of paper. He understood the archive as a living organism. He knew its rhythms, its hidden corners, its silent language. But this was a discordant note that shattered the harmony. It was a single slim folio, bound not in standard government-issue cardboard, but in a smooth, cold polymer that felt unnervingly like skin. It was wedged between a file on Cold War-era psychological operations and a heavily redacted report on UFO sightings over a naval base. It had no call number, no barcode, no indexing marks of any kind. It was a ghost on the shelves. Its only marking was a single, stark symbol stamped in faded red ink on its cover. A serpent eating its own tail, but looped into the shape of an infinity symbol, an Ouroboros twisted into something more. Aerys had cross-referenced every known classification symbol, from domestic intelligence to deep space reconnaissance. This one did not exist. He ran the file's physical dimensions and material composition through the archive's internal database. The system returned a single chilling result. No match found. Item does not exist. Yet, there it was, solid and cold in his hands. It was a paradox made manifest, a piece of information that had somehow escaped the system designed to contain all information. The weight of it felt wrong, too dense for its size. As he stood there, alone in the silent fluorescent-lit aisle, a primal sense of dread began to creep up his spine. This wasn't just a misplaced document. This was a violation, an anomaly. This was the file that should have been destroyed. Curiosity for an archivist like Aerys was a professional hazard. But this anomaly transcended curiosity. It was a gravitational pull, a void demanding to be understood. He took the file not to his usual workstation, but to a secure, soundproofed viewing room in the archive's deepest sublevel, a chamber known as the Quiet Room. It was here that the most sensitive documents were examined, shielded from any form of electronic or satellite surveillance. The room was a concrete box, furnished with only a steel table and a single chair. With a deep breath that did little to calm his racing heart, Elias opened the file. The contents were an insult to his profession. It was a testament not to information, but to its violent absence. Page after page was filled with thick, black, impenetrable bars of redaction. It was a massacre of text. 99% of the document was gone, obliterated by an authority so absolute it didn't even bother to cite its legal justification, as was standard practice. The redaction wasn't digital, it was physical, a heavy glossy ink that seemed to absorb the very light in the room. What little text remained was tantalizing and horrifying. Single words and fragmented phrases floated in a sea of black. Non-Euclidean geometry, successful temporal lock, unstable biological chimera, auditory bleed-through reported by staff, and the most chilling of all, containment failure at 0 point. These were not the sterile bureaucratic terms he was used to. This was the language of speculative fiction, of nightmares. It spoke of a science that had broken its leash. As Elias stared at the cryptic remnants, the whispers he had heard over his long career began to coalesce. Furtive conversations in the commissary, fragmented anecdotes from retiring field agents, stories of a shadow project so catastrophic that its records weren't just classified or archived, but supposedly deep burned, their data chains erased and physical copies incinerated. They spoke of a program that had touched something it shouldn't have, a project whose failure was so profound that the only response was to pretend it never existed. One former analyst, now a ghost of a man, had once told him over a clandestine drink, "There are some things the agency did that God himself would want redacted." The file on the table felt like the final, surviving testament to that sin. The redaction itself seemed to be a message. It was too thorough, too absolute. An expert in forensic documentation might say the patterns weren't random. They were deliberate, forming a secondary layer of information, a warning hidden within the act of concealment itself. For Elias, the file became a black mirror, reflecting back the most terrifying question of all. What truth could possibly be so monstrous that its complete and utter annihilation was the only sane response? The human mind abhors a vacuum. Faced with the void presented by the redacted file, Aerys Thorne began a dangerous, obsessive quest deep within the archive's own digital entrails. He used backdoors and forgotten administrator codes from decades past, risking his career and his freedom to chase the ghosts hidden in the machine. He searched for the fragmented phrases, for any mention of 0 point or auditory bleed-through. After weeks of sleepless nights, he found it. A single, corrupted data fragment in a decommissioned server, flagged for triple encryption and deletion. The fragment contained only 2 words, an official project designation that sent a shiver through him: the Chimera Protocol. This was the name of the sin, the name of the file. From this single key, a horrifying picture began to emerge, pieced together from whispers, deleted memos, and the file's own cryptic clues. The Chimera Protocol was not a weapons program. It was a metaphysical one. It was born in the feverish, paranoid peak of the Cold War, when fringe science was given a blank check. A clandestine division, known only as Subject Epsilon, was tasked with weaponizing reality itself. Their hypothesis was as arrogant as it was terrifying: that space-time was not a constant, but a fabric that could be manipulated, even punctured. The Chimera was their tool. It was not to be a creature of myth, but a living entity, a zygote, as the file mentioned, bioengineered to perceive dimensions beyond our own. They weren't just splicing genes, they were trying to splice physics into biology. The goal was to create a sentient being that could act as a key, an antenna to unlock what they called adjacent realities. An audio log, buried under layers of digital noise, contained the distorted voice of a scientist from Section Epsilon. His words, strained and panicked, painted a grim picture. The subject, the Chimera. It doesn't see, it perceives geometry. It perceives possibilities.
When it's active, the walls of the lab, they become suggestions. We hear things. Echoes of conversations that haven't happened yet. The staff complains of nightmares, of seeing impossible colors. We thought we were building a map maker, a scout for new frontiers. But we didn't make a map maker. We made a door. And now, it's opening from the other side. The Chimera Protocol, Aerys realized, was the ultimate act of hubris. It was an attempt to break the laws of the universe, to create a biological god. The file in his possession wasn't just a record of this attempt. It was the sole surviving piece of evidence of its catastrophic, reality-bending failure. It was the last will and testament of a project that had flown too close to a sun we cannot see. There was one last secret, hidden within the file. Tucked into a sleeve in the back of the polymer folio was a single unredacted microfiche. It contained no words, only a set of geographical coordinates and a date, September 26th, 1983. The coordinates pointed to a location deep in the Ural Mountains, near a small, now-defunct Soviet mining town called Alensk. Aerys cross-referenced the date. Official records, both Russian and American, noted a minor seismic anomaly in that region on that day, attributed to unsanctioned mining explosives or a natural gas pocket eruption. It was a footnote in geological surveys. But the file told a different story. This was 0 point. This was the day the Chimera Protocol reached its terrible conclusion. The Alensk Event, as the file implicitly named it, was not an explosion. It was a containment failure of reality itself. Suppressed intelligence reports, which Aerys now knew how to find, contained, fragmented, terrified accounts from local witnesses before the area was sanitized by the KGB. They didn't speak of a tremor, they spoke of an inversion. For 7 minutes, at midday, the sun went out, replaced by a sky filled with black stars. Witnesses described seeing the town's buildings appear to fold like paper, their geometry becoming fluid and impossible. They reported a sound, not a bang, but a pervasive, low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from inside their own skulls, a sound that induced violent nausea and vivid, terrifying hallucinations. It was the auditory bleed-through the file had mentioned, amplified to a catastrophic degree. The Chimera, the living key, had done its job. It had opened a door. And for 7 minutes, the town of Alensk was on the other side. When the event subsided, the town was still standing, but it was fundamentally wrong. Survivors spoke of lingering distortions, of reflections that moved incorrectly, of whispers in rooms that were empty. The Soviet response was swift and brutal.
The entire populace was relocated under the guise of a chemical spill. A permanent exclusion zone, miles wide, was established. Alensk became a ghost town, a monument to a secret no one was left alive to tell. The file, The file that should have been destroyed was the project's black box, the final record of a disaster that defied conventional understanding. Its existence in Archive 734 was a mistake, an oversight in a frantic, desperate cover-up. Its destruction was meant to be the final closing of the door. But here it is, found, read. And as we sit here in the safety of our world, we are left with the most terrifying question of all. If this file, the final lock on that door, was meant to be destroyed but wasn't, is the door truly closed?
Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some things, once heard, can never be unheard. Narrator. For decades, the events surrounding Project Chimera and its primary artifact, the document we call the file that should have been destroyed, were relegated to whispers and fragmented theories. There was no physical proof, no verifiable testimony, until this. The tapes were delivered to a secure Dropbox, no return address, no sender. Just a simple hand-scrawled note. He said the world needed to know. He said he was sorry. Inside the package were 3 7-inch reels of magnetic tape, brittle with age. The voice on them is weak, distorted by fear and the crude recording equipment. We have assigned this individual the designation Subject Epsilon. The recordings are undated, but audio analysis suggests they were made in the late 1980s, years after the project was officially shuttered and buried. Subject Epsilon. Don't know if this is working. Can't risk a phone line. They listen. They always listen. My name doesn't matter anymore. I was a technician. Applied Physics Division. I was there when Dr. Thorne opened the door. He didn't use a key. He used numbers. He used frequencies. The file, it wasn't a report. It was a schematic, a set of instructions. We were told it was for communication, a new way to listen to the cosmos. But it wasn't for listening. It was for calling. Narrator. Subject Epsilon's testimony is the first human account from inside the project. He speaks of Dr. Aerys Thorne, the enigmatic lead scientist we will explore later. But it's his description of the event itself that is most chilling. He doesn't describe an explosion or a disaster. He describes an arrival. Subject Epsilon. The hum started first. A low frequency that made your teeth ache. Then the air. It got thick.
Like breathing water. We saw it on the monitors, a distortion in the chamber. Not a light, not a shadow, a subtraction. A piece of reality had been scooped out. Thorne was ecstatic. He called it a success. But then, things came through the hole. Not creatures. Ideas. Shapes that hurt to look at. They imprinted on the chamber walls, on our equipment, on us. The file contained the resonance key, the sequence that invited them in. They told us to destroy it, to burn every copy. But I knew they wouldn't. Knowledge like that, they don't destroy it. They hide it. They try to control it. Narrator. Throughout the tapes, Subject Epsilon complains of symptoms that go far beyond psychological trauma. He speaks of seeing geometric patterns in his peripheral vision, of hearing whispers and white noise, of a constant cold pressure behind his eyes. He describes a biological alteration, a change at a fundamental level, consistent with the anomalous signatures we will soon investigate. This wasn't just an observation. It was a contamination. Subject Epsilon. It's inside me, the signal. It rewrites you. Slowly. I can't sleep. When I do, I dream of the architecture, the impossible city they showed us. I have to I have to get this out before my voice is no longer my own. The file is the key. Find it. Understand what it does. But for God's sake, never ever read it aloud. Narrator. The harrowing account of Subject Epsilon would be easy to dismiss as the paranoid delusion of a traumatized individual. But the physical evidence left in the wake of Project Chimera tells a different story. A story written not in ink, but in corrupted DNA and twisted biology. Shortly after the project was dismantled, a series of heavily classified environmental and biological studies were conducted within a 50-kilometer radius of the research facility. Most of these reports remain sealed under national security statutes, but some have leaked. What they reveal is terrifying. They speak of anomalous biological signatures, a clinical sterile term for something profoundly unnatural. Narrator. The first signs were in the local flora. Botanists assigned to the cleanup and containment teams reported species of pine trees whose needles grew in perfect fractal spirals, defying normal phylotaxis. They found fungi that exhibited bioluminescent properties, pulsing with a cold blue light in patterns that mimicked stellar constellations. These were not mutations in the Darwinian sense. They were not random. They were organized, complex, and seemingly intelligent in their design. It was as if the very code of life in the area was being systematically rewritten by an alien author. The source code for this change, investigators theorized, was the information contained within the file. It wasn't just data. It was a biological weapon, or perhaps a terraforming tool, operating on principles we still do not understand. Narrator. The effect on fauna was even more disturbing. A partially declassified veterinary autopsy report details the case of a deer found near the perimeter. Its skeletal structure had been altered, with ribs curving outwards into a cage-like lattice. Its tissues were riddled with microscopic, silicon-based organisms that seemed to be integrating with the host's nervous system. The official conclusion was unknown environmental contaminant. But internal memos suggest a more frightening hypothesis: that the signal broadcast during the Chimera experiment did not just influence existing life, it created new forms, parasitizing the old. This aligns with Subject Epsilon's fear of being rewritten. Was the file a blueprint for a new form of life, one designed to supplant our own? The evidence points not to destruction, but to replacement. A quiet, cellular conquest that begins with a single blade of grass and ends where? The most classified annexes of these reports are rumored to contain data on human exposure. They remain the most tightly guarded secrets of the entire affair, leaving us with the terrifying, unanswered question: if this is what happened to the trees and the animals, what happened to the people?
Narrator. Every ghost story needs a haunted house. For Project Chimera, it is not a house, but a vast, quarantined wound in the earth. Officially, it is designated United States Military Exclusion Area 734. Its operators called it the Anvil. Locals and urban explorers who dare to speak of it call it the Zone of Silence. On paper, its existence is justified by a convenient chemical spill during a Cold War-era military exercise. But the lockdown protocols are far too extreme for a simple chemical leak. We're talking layers of chain-link fences topped with razor wire, infrared cameras, motion sensors, and armed patrols with orders to detain, no questions asked. No-fly zones are strictly enforced. Satellite imagery of the area is often censored, appearing as a blurry, pixelated void. They aren't keeping people out to protect them from what's inside. They are protecting us from it ever getting out. Narrator. The name, the Zone of Silence, is unnervingly literal. The few illicit accounts from those who claim to have breached the outer perimeter all speak of a profound and unnatural quiet. It's a sensory deprivation. Birds don't sing. Insects don't buzz. Even the wind seems to die as it crosses the boundary. All radio frequencies are absorbed into a deadening void. Compasses spin uselessly. GPS signals vanish. It's a pocket of reality, where the normal laws of physics appear to have been suspended. This phenomenon is no accident. It is the direct, lingering aftermath of the event triggered by the file. The file's instructions didn't just open a door. They shattered the mirror of our reality in this one location. And the silence is the sound of those broken pieces. Narrator. At the heart of the zone lies the remains of the Black Ridge Research Facility, a collection of brutalist concrete structures now being slowly consumed by the strangely altered vegetation.
Leaked photographs from the initial containment team show rooms where gravity seems to have warped, with equipment fused to ceilings. They show hallways covered in the same crystalline biological growth found in the local fauna. Most disturbing are the reports of temporal distortions, containment teams experiencing hours of missing time, or seeing brief, fleeting images of the facility as it was, bustling with scientists who are now long dead or missing. The zone is not just a contaminated place, it's a scar on time itself. It is the physical embodiment of the file's contents, a permanent echo of the moment when Dr. Thorne read the forbidden text and the silence fell. The lingering question that keeps military strategists awake at night is not whether the zone can be cleansed, but whether it is stable. Or is it, millimeter by millimeter, year by year, silently expanding? Narrator. At the center of every mystery, there is a person, a mind that conceived the inconceivable. For Project Chimera, that mind belonged to Dr. Aerys Thorne. His official record is a study in controlled genius, a prodigy in theoretical physics and xenolinguistics, recruited from academia at a young age for a project so secret it didn't even have a name. He was given a blank check, an underground facility, and a single objective: to make contact. Thorne was the architect of the file. He didn't find it. He didn't translate it. By all accounts, he wrote it. He channeled it. Narrator. Thorne believed that the universe was filled with information, with signals, and that what we perceive as empty space was in fact a sea of data. He theorized that a sufficiently complex signal, a specific sequence of frequencies and mathematical constants, could act as a key, unlocking a direct channel to a non-human intelligence. The file was that key. It was his life's work. But recovered fragments from a personal journal, saved by a sympathetic assistant, reveal a man increasingly haunted by his creation. He wrote of dreams filled with impossible geometry. He described hearing a polyphonic whisper in the static between radio stations. He wasn't just building a receiver. He was becoming one. Narrator. The night of the incident, Aerys Thorne vanished. The official story, fed to his family, and the few colleagues not read into the project, was that he died in a lab explosion. His body was never recovered. But two primary theories persist within the intelligence community that has tried to piece this puzzle together. The first is that Thorne was eliminated, that when his experiment succeeded, his superiors panicked. They shut it down, quarantined the area, and removed the one man who knew how to do it again. A clean, cold, professional silencing. But the second theory is far more disturbing. It suggests Thorne was not a victim, but the ultimate success story of his own work. That when the door opened, he walked through it. Or perhaps something walked out and took his place. Narrator. This second theory finds chilling corroboration in the final, frantic moments of Subject Epsilon's tape. He doesn't say, Thorne was killed. He says, Thorne. He opened the door. He speaks of him in the present tense. Could Aerys Thorne, or the thing that was once Aerys Thorne, still be out there? A ghost in the system? A living vessel for the very information contained in the file that should have been destroyed? He is the missing variable, the author who stepped into his own story. And as long as he remains unaccounted for, the final, terrifying chapter of this story is yet to be written.
Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors are locked for a reason. In the labyrinthine corridors of power, beneath the notice of public record, there are men who are paid to be ghosts. They are the guardians of secrets, the silent sentinels standing between the world we know and the truths it is not ready for. They were the security detail for Project Chimera, the operation that produced the document we now know as the file that should have been destroyed. These were not ordinary guards. Recruited from the most elite echelons of military intelligence and special forces, they were selected for their psychological resilience, their unwavering obedience, and their capacity for absolute discretion. Their contract was not with a government, but with a shadow entity that existed in the spaces between official departments. Their oath was not to a flag, but to a secret. We've managed to unearth a heavily redacted psychological evaluation of one such officer, designated only as Sentinel-4. The report notes an abnormal tolerance for sensory deprivation and a pronounced lack of effective response to high-stress stimuli. These were not men, they were human vaults. Their duty was simple in its description, yet staggering in its implications. Guard a single room inside a sub-basement of a nondescript federal building, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The protocols were draconian. Guards worked in 8-hour shifts, always in pairs, but were forbidden from speaking to one another while on duty. They entered and exited through separate, airlocked corridors. They never saw the faces of the researchers who came and went. Those individuals were always hooded. The room itself was a Faraday cage, impervious to all electronic surveillance. The door was a 1-ton slab of reinforced steel and composite alloys, secured by a dual authentication biometric lock, requiring the simultaneous presence of a project lead and the site commander. But the most chilling detail comes from a leaked fragment of their operational manual. Section 5, subsection C. In the event of an unsanctioned breach, Sentinel Protocol dictates the immediate sanitization of the containment. Lethal force is authorized against any and all personnel, including fellow Sentinels, attempting to remove or copy the asset. The asset itself is to be incinerated via the integrated thermite charge. Your own survival is secondary to the asset's destruction. Think about that. These men were sworn to kill their own colleagues, to die themselves, rather than let that file fall into the wrong hands. What knowledge could possibly warrant such a brutal, self-immolating protocol? The psychological toll was immense. Sentinel-4's evaluation later notes the onset of acute paranoia and auditory hallucinations, specifically hearing whispered conversations in a language he could not identify, which seemed to emanate from the other side of the vault door. He was honorably and silently discharged, his memory clouded by officially sanctioned pharmaceuticals. He became another ghost, his service record sealed and buried. These men were the first line of defense, the human firewall. They didn't know what was in the file. They were simply ordered to protect it, and if necessary, to die ensuring it was erased from existence. Their sworn secrecy is the first black layer of the onion we are trying to peel back. A wall of silence guarding a terrible truth.
Before there was a security detail, before there was a file, there was one person, the Observer. This is the title we have given to the anonymous author of the document, the individual whose research and field notes form the terrifying core of Project Chimera. We don't know their name, their gender, or their allegiance. All we have are the pages they left behind, a chaotic, brilliant, and horrifying chronicle of their findings. The file is not a simple report. It's a collection of disparate data points that, when assembled, paint an impossible picture. It contains astronomical charts overlaid with what appear to be migratory patterns of unknown biological entities. It has spectrographic analysis of materials with isotopic ratios that do not occur naturally on Earth. But the most disturbing sections are the handwritten field notes, scrawled in the margins with a frantic, intellectual urgency. The Observer used a complex cipher, a mix of Basque, Navajo, and a series of unique glyphs to conceal their most sensitive thoughts. For years, cryptographers believed it was unbreakable. But a recent breakthrough using quantum computing algorithms has allowed us to translate fragments. One translated entry reads, "They do not perceive linear time. Communication is therefore paradoxical. They offer a gift that is also a threat. The pattern must be understood before the convergence." What convergence? What gift? The language is that of a scientist pushed to the edge of reason, grappling with a concept that shatters the foundations of known physics. The Observer was clearly not just a theorist working in a lab. The notes detail clandestine field expeditions to remote locations, a specific cave system in the Ural Mountains, a deep-sea trench off the coast of Japan, a plateau in the Antarctic that is officially listed as unexplored. In these locations, the Observer recorded anomalous energy readings and collected physical samples, which are described in terrifying detail.
One sample, designated Specimen 7, is described as a non-carbon-based crystalline structure that exhibits properties of both a living organism and a data storage device. The Observer notes that exposing the crystal to specific frequencies caused it to emit a low-level telepathic signal, projecting images of non-Euclidean geometry and collapsing star systems into the minds of the research team. The psychological impact on the team is documented with cold detachment. Subject A exhibited catatonia after 3.2 minutes of exposure. Subject B attempted self-harm, screaming about the angles of the architecture. The project was consuming its creators. The Observer's final entries become increasingly erratic. The scientific objectivity dissolves into raw fear and awe. It is not a weapon, it is not an organism, it is a key, one of the last legible notes reads. But the lock is reality itself. To turn the key is to unmake the door. This was the person who saw the abyss, documented its dimensions, and tried to warn us. Their coded notes are not just a scientific record, they are a testament. a desperate message in a bottle from a mind that had traveled too far. This is the genesis of the file that should have been destroyed. The raw, unfiltered data from the one who looked first.
The secret of this magnitude cannot be contained by steel doors and sworn oaths alone. Knowledge, like water, always finds a way to leak. And when the subject is the file that should have been destroyed, the consequences of such leaks are fatal. As we trace the timeline of Project Chimera, a disturbing pattern emerges. A trail of brilliant minds extinguished just as they were getting too close to the truth. These were not accidents or random acts of violence. This was a systematic, surgical removal of individuals who posed a threat to the file's secrecy. Consider the case of Dr. Aerys Thorne, a respected astrophysicist at Caltech in the late 1970s. Thorne published a controversial paper on anomalous background radiation signatures that seemed to emanate from a fixed point beyond the Oort cloud. His data was impeccable, but his conclusions, that the signals were structured and non-random, were ridiculed by the mainstream scientific community. He was quietly denied tenure. 2 years later, he vanished. His car was found at a remote desert overlook, keys in the ignition, his complex notebooks left on the passenger seat. The official explanation was suicide, but no body was ever found. What the official report doesn't mention is that the coordinates of Thorne's radiation source match a set of coordinates found in the observer's field notes. Then there's Evelyn Reed, a cryptographer for the NSA. In 1985, she was tasked with decrypting a single intercepted transmission of unknown origin. A colleague later testified in a closed hearing that Reed had become obsessed, working late into the night, convinced she was on the verge of a breakthrough. She told this colleague, "It's not a message. It's an equation that proves travel is irrelevant." The day she was scheduled to present her findings to her superiors, Evelyn Reed never showed up for work. Her apartment was empty, wiped clean. Not a single personal item was left behind. She was declared a defector, her name and record erased from NSA archives. The equation she was solving, it appears in a more complete form in a chapter of the file detailing non-local transport mechanics. The pattern continues. A geologist who discovered strange crystalline formations in the Urals, a biologist studying extremophiles in deep-sea trenches, a journalist investigating unusual spending within obscure government subcommittees. Each one a loose thread. Each one meticulously snipped from the tapestry of history. These weren't just disappearances. They were erasures. Their work was confiscated, their online presence scrubbed, their families often intimidated into silence with threats to their own safety. It was a silent, undeclared war fought in the shadows, not to steal information, but to contain it. The disappearances serve as a brutal testament to the file's power. The architects of this conspiracy understood that the contents of the file were not just classified information, they were a conceptual contagion. Once the idea takes root, it cannot be easily removed. And so they didn't just target the data, they targeted the people who were capable of understanding it. Each disappearance is a ghost, a silent scream confirming the terrifying importance of the file that should have been destroyed. We arrive at the final act, the culmination of the research, the secrecy, and the disappearances. The moment a decision was made at the highest, most invisible level of power. The directive was simple, absolute, and chilling. Project Chimera was to be terminated. all research, all samples, all personnel records, and most importantly, the primary synthesis of the observer's findings, the file itself, were to be irrevocably destroyed. The official order, a single page signed only with a cryptic symbol, bore the stamp, "Burn after reading." Why? Why, after decades of clandestine work, unimaginable expense, and a human cost measured in erased lives, would they choose to destroy their greatest secret? The answer, we believe, lies in the file's final, terrifying chapter. This section wasn't just data. It was a set of instructions, a blueprint. The observer hadn't just discovered something. They had figured out how to use it. The file contained a practical, applicable methodology for what it termed ontological engineering, the ability to manipulate the foundational principles of reality. It was the key to unlocking the non-local transport and the paradoxical communication mentioned in the early notes. But the observer's final desperate warning, translated from the deepest level of their cipher, was this: the structure is not stable. Opening the door weakens the frame. Every use diminishes causality. It is a tool that breaks the user. The high-level committee that oversaw Project Chimera, a shadowy group known only as Oversight, had realized the truth. They had commissioned a weapon, but had been handed a suicide bomb. The power described in the file was too great, too seductive, and too fundamentally dangerous to exist. Its use, even once, could trigger a cascading failure of cause and effect, unraveling the very fabric of the timeline. The risk of an enemy power obtaining it was secondary to the risk of their own side being tempted to use it. The destruction order was not a cover-up of a failure, but a desperate act of self-preservation for the entire human species. The sanitization was scheduled for a specific, astrologically significant date, a detail that hints at the esoteric, almost superstitious fear the file had instilled in these powerful men. Teams in black fatigues, armed with incinerators, descended on multiple black sites simultaneously. But here is the crucial moment in our story. The directive failed. In the primary facility, the one housing the master copy of the file, a single archivist, a man named Aerys Vance, made a choice. We know his name from a single, scorched personnel log that survived the purge. Vance, a quiet historian who had been tasked with organizing the project's data, had clearly understood the implications of what he was reading. He believed that erasing the knowledge, however dangerous, was a greater crime than preserving it. In the final moments before the incineration team breached the vault, Vance swapped the master file with a decoy filled with mundane atmospheric data. He then initiated a secondary security protocol, a data burst that sent an encrypted, fragmented copy of the file to a dozen anonymous servers across the globe, a digital time capsule. Vance was never seen again, presumably sanitized, along with the rest of the project's personnel. But his final act of defiance is the reason we can even tell this story. A fragment of that file survived. A single chapter, a few charred pages, a corrupted data packet, a piece of the file that should have been destroyed but wasn't. And it is this surviving fragment that continues to haunt the dark corners of the world. A whispered promise of impossible power and ultimate annihilation. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. History is not written by the victors. It is written by those who control the archives. And when an archive becomes a liability, a threat to the established order, there are those who will go to extraordinary lengths to erase it. This brings us to Operation Ashfall. It wasn't a military maneuver or a clandestine mission in a foreign land. Its battlefield was the filing cabinet, the server room, the forgotten basement storage of our own institutions. Its enemy was a single damning collection of data, the file that should have been destroyed. The official name was Sanitization Protocol 734, but its architects gave it a more poetic, more final name, Ashfall. The objective was absolute, not just to hide the file, not to classify it, but to ensure its complete and utter non-existence, to make it a ghost, a rumor, a hole in the fabric of recorded history. The operation was compartmentalized to an extreme degree. Teams were assembled with no knowledge of the larger purpose. One unit was tasked with incinerating physical documents in high-temperature industrial furnaces, their logbooks recording only the weight of the paper, never the content. Another, a team of early digital pioneers, was assigned to degauss magnetic tapes and overwrite server data using algorithms designed to leave no recoverable trace. They called it digital scouring. They were told it was a routine data migration, a simple matter of clearing obsolete records. But the level of security, the armed guards posted outside server farms in the middle of the night, told a different story. Eyewitness accounts, pieced together from heavily redacted debriefing transcripts we managed to acquire, speak of a chilling efficiency. They describe convoys of unmarked black trucks moving between secure facilities under the cover of pre-dawn fog. They speak of the smell of burning paper and plastic hanging over remote industrial parks for weeks. The protocol was meticulous. Every known copy, every draft, every carbon paper duplicate, and every reference to the file's project name, Project Chimera, was targeted. Cross-references in other documents were expunged. Index cards were removed from library catalogs. Personnel involved in the original project were reassigned, their security clearances altered to prevent them from ever accessing related materials again. Operation Ashfall was a systematic, government-sanctioned memory wipe. It was the frantic, desperate act of an entity terrified of its own creation. They weren't just destroying a file, they were attempting to destroy a fact, to surgically remove a moment in time. But in their quest for total annihilation, they made a critical error. They believed that information, once recorded, could be unrecorded. They underestimated the tenacity of truth and the conscience of a single, dissenting voice. In any vast, monolithic bureaucracy, there are cracks. In the rigid chain of command, there are moments of individual conscience. As Operation Ashfall raged through the archives, one man, Dr. Alistair Finch, became one such crack. Finch was not a high-level director or a political appointee. He was a mid-level analyst, a quiet, unassuming man who had been one of the primary authors of the Chimera report. He had lived with the data, breathed its implications, and was haunted by its terrible potential. While his superiors saw a threat to national security and public order that needed to be buried, Finch saw a moral and existential warning that needed to be preserved. He understood the sanitization protocol for what it was, an act of profound cowardice, an attempt to unsay something that had already been said. So he committed an act of quiet, desperate rebellion. In the dead of night, in the privacy of his secured office, using a non-networked typewriter to avoid digital surveillance, he composed a memo,
It was not an official report. It was a plea, a confession, and a warning, addressed to no one and everyone, addressed to the future. This document, which we now call the Finch Memo, became the heart of the file that should have been destroyed. In it, Finch didn't just summarize the horrifying data of Project Chimera. He detailed the cover-up itself. He named the architects of Operation Ashfall. He described the methods of destruction, the veiled threats made to personnel, and the pervasive culture of fear that had been cultivated to ensure silence. He wrote, and I quote from a recovered fragment, "They are burning our work not because it is wrong, but because it is true. They seek to erase this chapter, to pretend this path was never taken. But the map of a minefield is not the danger. The danger is the unmarked ground. This report is that map, and to destroy it is to condemn future generations to walk blind." Finch knew that creating this memo was a career-ending, if not life-ending, act. He was a man meticulously documenting his own treason against an institution he had served his entire life. He typed with a grim purpose, each keystroke a defiant monument against the encroaching silence. The memo was his dissent, his message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of state-sponsored amnesia. He then made a single carbon copy. He sealed the original memo and the carbon copy with the most crucial sections of the Chimera report itself. He had created two packages, two chances for the truth to survive the fire. The question was, how could he get them out of the building, past the watchful eyes of the very people he was exposing?
The discovery of the envelope in the Nevada warehouse was pure chance. It was found during a mandated inventory before the building's demolition. The crate was opened, and among dried-up inkwells and rusted paperclips, there was a single, sealed manila envelope. Its age and the faded official markings were enough to send it not to the trash, but to the National Archives for analysis. This is where the file that should have been destroyed entered the 21st century. When forensic archivists received it, they weren't just looking at old paper. They were looking at a historical crime scene. The challenge was immense. 40 years in the fluctuating heat of the desert had taken its toll. The paper was brittle, the envelope's adhesive had fused with the flap, and the ink from the typewriter ribbon was faded. Opening it, without destroying the contents, was the first hurdle. They used a humidification chamber to slowly relax the paper fibers and a specialized enzymatic solvent to dissolve the old glue. Once opened, the documents were handled only in a nitrogen-filled environment to prevent further oxidation. The real work began with non-invasive imaging. Using multispectral imaging, a technique that bombards the document with different wavelengths of light from infrared to ultraviolet, they could see things invisible to the naked eye. Faded typewriter impressions became sharp and clear. Smudges on the paper were revealed to be fingerprints. They even identified the specific make and model of Alistair Finch's typewriter, based on the unique microscopic imperfections in the metal letter slugs. This allowed them to authenticate the document, cross-referencing the typographical fingerprint with other non-classified memos Finch had written during his career. DNA analysis was next. They swabbed the envelope's seal, where Finch would have licked it closed. They managed to extract a partial DNA profile, which, while not enough for a positive ID against a public database, provided another layer of unique biological evidence tying a specific individual to this document. Then came the carbon copy pages. Carbon paper from that era was notoriously unstable. The waxy ink had bled and blurred over the decades. Forensic document specialists used a technique called video spectral comparison, which allowed them to digitally separate the faint carbon ink from the paper background, reconstructing sentences that were previously illegible. Slowly, painstakingly, the full text of the Finch memo and the horrifying data from Project Chimera were being brought back from the brink of oblivion. The science was making the unsayable sayable again. Every restored word was a victory against Operation Ashfall. Every recovered sentence was a testament to Finch's desperate act of preservation. The file was unsealed, and its secrets, once buried under decades of dust and silence, were finally ready to be heard. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, refuse to close. The story of Alensk did not end in 1968 with the sealing of the exclusion zone and the burial of a truth inside a file that should have been destroyed. The event was not a single contained explosion of energy and matter. It was a wound, a deep, septic laceration in the fabric of our reality. And like any wound left to fester, it continues to pulse, to bleed, to infect the world around it. Decades later, the area surrounding the old Alensk facility remains a dead zone, but not a silent one. It speaks, and what it says is terrifying. Urban explorers and paranormal investigators, drawn to the site by its dark legend, have brought back evidence that defies conventional explanation. Their audio recorders capture what is known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs. But these are not the typical whispers of lost souls. They are clear, structured, and utterly alien. We've analyzed dozens of these recordings. Some contain long, complex mathematical equations that modern supercomputers struggle to solve. Others are glitched, looping fragments of the final panicked radio transmissions from inside the facility on that fateful day, as if caught in a temporal echo chamber. It's the sound of a nightmare on repeat. But the anomalies are not limited to sound. Localized temporal distortions are a common report. Compasses spin erratically. GPS systems fail catastrophically. And watches, both analog and digital, will stop for minutes, sometimes hours, only to resume as if no time has passed. More disturbingly, several independent teams have reported episodes of missing time, returning from the zone with memory gaps and footage that shows them standing motionless for hours, their faces blank.
The file spoke of the experiment causing a fracturing of local space-time. What these explorers are experiencing are the aftershocks, the splinters from that initial break, still working their way through the present. Perhaps the most visually stunning and deeply unsettling phenomena are the lights. On nights with perfect atmospheric clarity, when no auroras should be visible at this latitude, the sky directly above the buried facility erupts in silent, geometric light shows. These are not the gentle flowing curtains of the aurora borealis. They are rigid, angular patterns of sickly green and violet light that pulse with a cold, intelligent rhythm. It's as if something is still active deep underground, projecting a signal into the heavens. And it seems someone is listening. Unmarked Black Ops helicopters patrol the perimeter. Satellite imagery, purchased from private providers, shows sterile white vehicles moving along the zone's access roads at odd hours, with no official explanation. These are not cleanup crews or environmental monitors. They are watchers. They are maintaining the quarantine. They understand what the file made terrifyingly clear. The Alensk Event wasn't an end. It was a beginning. The signal is still broadcasting. And the terrifying question we must ask ourselves is not just what it is, but what happens if, after all these years, something finally answers back.
For over 50 years, the secrets of Alensk were buried under layers of concrete, redactions, and fear. The key players were gone, their voices silenced by time or by force. The story, it seemed, was destined to become a ghost, a footnote in the annals of conspiracy. But history has a strange way of resurrecting its dead. The resurrection began not in a dusty archive or a secret bunker, but with an inheritance. Aerys Thorne, a brilliant but unassuming astrophysicist living in London, was the granddaughter of Dr. Aerys Thorne, the lead scientist of the Alensk project. She knew him only through stories, a quiet, dedicated man, lost in a tragic industrial accident. She had no idea that he was the architect of the event detailed in the file that should have been destroyed. Her life's trajectory was irrevocably altered by the arrival of a heavy steel footlocker, a long-forgotten item from her grandfather's estate. Inside, beneath faded photographs and official commendations for his public work, she found a false bottom. The hidden compartment contained not mementos, but the secret history of a man wrestling with the infinite. There was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with his frantic, elegant script. It spoke of the aperture, a device he had built to peer into what he called adjacent realities. His equations were unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen, blending quantum mechanics with theoretical concepts that bordered on the occult. He wrote of a signal they received through the aperture, a structured transmission that was not just intelligent, but impossibly ancient. His final entries were filled with dread, speaking of an observer effect on a cosmic scale. He feared they were not just looking through a window, but that something on the other side had begun to look back. Tucked within the journal was a star chart. Evelyn, an expert in celestial cartography, realized with a growing sense of cold horror that the constellations were subtly wrong.
The parallax was off. This was a map of the stars as seen from a world many light years away from Earth. And resting on the chart was a small, palm-sized object, a piece of metal, impossibly dense, with a surface so black it seemed to drink the light. It was cool to the touch, and according to her initial analysis, possessed no recognizable atomic structure. It was an artifact from the other side. Initially, Evelyn's rational mind fought against the implications. It had to be a hoax, a complex prank, or the tragic ramblings of a brilliant mind collapsing under pressure. But she couldn't ignore the science. She began running his equations through her university's quantum computer. The results were terrifying. They didn't just model a stable, traversable wormhole. They suggested it was already open. Cross-referencing names and dates from the journal with declassified government records, she found it. A heavily redacted incident report on the Alensk anomaly. And there, in a footnote, was the project's internal code name, a name that chilled her to the bone. Project Damocles. The Sword of Damocles. A story about the ever-present peril faced by those in positions of power. Her grandfather had been holding a sword over the entire world. The chapter of her old life closed one quiet evening in her lab. As she worked, she heard a low hum. It was the artifact. It had been inert for half a century, but her research, her focus, her very attention to the problem of Alensk had somehow activated it.
Armed with her grandfather's impossible legacy, a journal of forbidden science, and an artifact that defied physics, Evelyn Thorne began to pull at the threads of the official story. She quickly discovered that the truth of Alensk wasn't just buried. It was entombed in a sepulchre of bureaucratic concrete, guarded by a silent, multi-generational conspiracy. Her first attempts were formal. She filed Freedom of Information Act requests with every relevant agency, citing her grandfather's involvement. The responses that came back months later were an exercise in institutional contempt. Documents were returned with entire pages, sometimes entire sections, blacked out by the censor's marker. The few words left visible were meaningless, without context. Every denial, every redaction, was justified with the same monolithic phrase: national security. It was a wall designed to be impenetrable. She tried academic and historical channels. The archives of the state-run institute where Aerys Thorne had worked claimed all records from his division for the years 1965 through 1969 had been completely destroyed in a catastrophic electrical fire in 1972. It was too precise, too convenient. A fire that surgically removes only the most sensitive data is no accident. It is an act of erasure. Her investigation led her to Marcus Cole, a disgraced journalist living in obscurity. In the early 1980s, Cole had gotten a tip from a former Alensk guard and had come closer than anyone to exposing the truth. He spoke to Evelyn in a hushed, paranoid tone, telling her of the shadows that fell over his life after he started asking questions. His phone was tapped, his apartment was broken into, and his sources either vanished or recanted their stories. A smear campaign destroyed his career, painting him as a delusional crank. "They don't just kill stories, kid," he warned her, his voice trembling slightly. "They built a machine to protect that secret, and it runs on lives." The documentary now presents the official narrative, the lie polished by decades of repetition. We see black and white archival news reports, stern-faced men in ill-fitting suits at press conferences, speaking of the Alensk chemical plant disaster. They explain it away as a tragic confluence of equipment failure and human error involving volatile, experimental, agricultural chemicals. A story that was plausible, easy to digest, and utterly false. But this official history crumbles under the weight of the evidence we now possess. A chemical spill does not generate the unique seismic signature of a spatial shearing event, as recorded by monitoring stations hundreds of miles away. It doesn't cause a magnetic pulse strong enough to wipe out electronics in a 50-mile radius. And it certainly does not explain how the facility's central laboratory, a 5-story structure of reinforced concrete and steel, was not blown apart, but was, according to the one unredacted line in a geological survey, excised from reality, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, glass-lined crater. The wall of silence surrounding Alensk is more than just a cover-up. It is a quarantine of information, a desperate, ongoing effort to pretend the door that Dr. Thorne opened was never even there. But as Evelyn's actions with the artifact began to resonate, she was no longer just a researcher looking at the past. She had become a new variable. And deep within the silent, watchful architecture of the state, an alarm, dormant for decades, began to blink. We stand now at the edge of an abyss, staring into a darkness that has been actively hidden from us for more than 50 years. We have the fragmented testimony from the file that should have been destroyed. We have the persistent, inexplicable phenomena that haunt the exclusion zone to this day. We have the cryptic inheritance of a scientist who broke the laws of our universe. And we have the monolithic wall of official denial that proves the secret is considered vital. So, what is the unresolved truth of Alensk? What really happened in the final moments inside that facility when the world changed forever? The evidence points to several terrifying possibilities. The first and most direct interpretation is that of interdimensional contact. Dr. Thorne's team, in their scientific hubris, did exactly what the journal claimed. They opened a door. The signal they received was a greeting, a lure, and the observer effect was the consequence. Something from a reality with different physical laws became aware of us. The catastrophic event was not an accident, but a hostile incursion, a bridge being slammed shut before an invasion could begin. In this scenario, the global cover-up is a desperate act of planetary defense, hiding a vulnerability so profound it could shatter human civilization. The second theory is more terrestrial, but no less frightening. The discovery of a new physics, a weapon of unimaginable power. Perhaps the aperture didn't look upon another world, but upon the very engine of reality itself. Perhaps the experiment wasn't a failure, but a terrifying success, unlocking a source of energy that makes the atomic bomb look like a firecracker. The Alensk disaster could have been the first field test of a doomsday weapon, one so powerful and uncontrollable that its creators were forced to bury it and deny its existence, lest it trigger a new, ultimate arms race. The secrecy, then, is to keep this terrible power from ever being used again. But there is a third, more esoteric possibility, one that aligns with Dr. Thorne's final, panicked journal entries. What if they didn't create anything? What if they simply stumbled upon something that was already there? A natural recurring rift in space-time, a weak point in the membrane of our universe. The Alensk facility might have been built there specifically to study this anomaly. The accident was simply the rift's cyclical, violent behavior. They didn't open a door. They were merely standing too close to one as it swung open on its own. The ongoing quarantine, then, is not to hide a secret, but to monitor a slumbering cosmic horror, praying it never fully awakens. All these theories circle the central, unresolved truth. We are not alone. Whether the other is from across the stars, another dimension, or from the very fabric of space-time itself, the Alensk Event proved that humanity's understanding of the universe is tragically incomplete. The final pages of Dr. Thorne's journal are consumed by his fear of the observer effect. He believed that by looking they had created an unbreakable quantum entanglement. They were now linked. The final scene of our investigation is not in the past, but in the present. Evelyn Thorne is in her lab, late at night. The artifact sits on her desk, humming with a barely audible frequency. As she leans closer, she sees a reflection on its impossible, light-absorbing surface. It is not her own. It is a distorted, elongated silhouette, a thing of impossible angles and shifting shadow. Her blood runs cold. She spins around, her heart pounding in her chest. The lab is empty. And then, from the hallway, she hears a sound. A soft, metallic click. The deadbolt on her apartment door has just unlocked itself.